Good morning. Happy Independence Day. I was reminded of something in the waking moments this morning of a sermon that I preached. I was just out of seminary and I was serving at a church in Cajun Crossroads country, or Cajun country actually. And I had to give a sermon. I don't remember if it was on around my birthday weekend in September or if it was actually 4th of July time, but there was a heavy 4th of July sort of theme to the sermon, and I introduced the sermon with the fact that on September 5th, 1651, a Baptist minister by the name of Obadiah Holmes, they were actually basically visiting a shut-in is what it boils down to. And while they were there, because the member, he was up in years and unable to travel to Newport, where the church actually was, and because the elderly person lived in Lynn, I believe it was Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1651, and because he couldn't travel there, they came to him, which is a common occurrence in a lot of churches nowadays, to visit the shut-ins, the infirm, sometimes done by deacons or other folks within the church. Well, before you take for granted or think that religious liberty is just something that we've always had in this nation, of course this was before we were fully a nation here, 1651, 1776, quite a ways off, but it was on July 21st of 1651 that they went and saw this man in his home, and it was him and two other men from the church. And as they were there, apparently there was a little bit of preaching went on, and because they were not able to go to church, so they started sharing the word, and it turned into a church service. I don't know if you've ever been in an experience like that, but you're amongst friends, and you start sharing what the Lord has done for you, and all of a sudden church breaks out. Well, as they were doing this, a crowd started to gather at the home, and before long, the constable and the authorities came and arrested the three men that had come to visit this man in his home, who was unable to come to church. And it was a fiery bit of a trial, that all three men were tried basically a week later, within a week basically of the July 21st date. They were tried and given fines. Well, Obadiah Holmes, since he was I guess he was considered the ringleader or the prime instigator, they fined him 30 pounds. They fined, I guess, his next closest co-conspirator 20 pounds, and they fined the third guy 5 pounds. So I guess he was just an accessory or an accomplice. But one thing I did, I went and found a calculator that converted money in that time period to modern dollars, and 30 pounds in 1651 was basically, he got fined the equivalent of nearly $6,000 in today's dollars for preaching at a shut-in man's house. Okay, because it was not the popular religion of that area and that land. He was a Baptist preacher, and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, that was close to Salem and that whole New England community, and the faith that they had was more puritanical and otherwise. And so they were not the religion of the land, and so they were persecuted. So if you think that religious freedom has been a given ever since we set foot on this land of America, just know little pieces of history like this, it wasn't always, freedom wasn't always free, as they say. It wasn't always available. Well, to give you the rest of that story, 6 weeks after, because it was such a large sum of money, some of the church members and stuff contributed the 25 pounds for the two other men, but Minister Holmes, he refused to pay the 30-pound fine. So 6 weeks later, month and a half, on my birthday in that year, although I wasn't born yet, he was taken to Boston. He was basically attached to the whipping post in the public square, and he was whipped with a 3-corded whip 30 times. And of course, in the moment, he said it felt like nothing and all this sort of stuff, but there were witnesses and observers that are documented that said they were surprised that the man survived. That he literally could not sleep apart from sleeping on his knees and elbows, because he could not lay on his back. And so one of the earliest moments in American history where religious persecution occurred on this very continent. And the sermon that I used that intro in was called A Thoroughfare for Freedom Beat, as I just got buzzed by a jay, a blue jay, fighting with another. Wow. Well, I mean, he came so close, I felt like I thought I'd almost gotten it. But a thoroughfare from Freedom Beat is, a lot of churches this Sunday morning will be singing America the Beautiful. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies. We rarely get to the second verse. Oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet, whose stern impassioned stress a thoroughfare for freedom beat across the wilderness. And I think that line is beautiful in its poetry of speaking of two different things. One, oh, beautiful for pilgrim feet. So there were folks, pilgrims, that were coming for a religious freedom of experience from what they had experienced in England. And that stern, impassioned stress, it drove them. The stress and the passion for what they wanted to do drove them to blaze a trail, a thoroughfare being a road for freedom. They blazed that trail across a wilderness, across a land that was not ready for such a thing. And when I think about that, and I think about Obadiah Holmes, I think it becomes a metaphor, quite literally, that religious freedom, while that was what the initial pilgrims came to this land in a lot of ways for, he literally wore that path to religious freedom on his back with those lashes. So it was a thoroughfare that was beat across that man's back. Rest of the story in his case was eventually the minister that was there at the Baptist church in Newport went back to England, and Obadiah Holmes became the minister there in Newport for the next 30 years. An impressive tenure, to be sure, even nowadays in our enlightened world. And also, this one, it's not as close in generations, but you think about the story of Boaz and Ruth, and it eventually led to the birth of David in their family line, and it eventually led to the birth of Jesus in the Davidic line. Well, not quite the level of Jesus, and not quite as close in relation as David, but a direct lineal ancestor, or not ancestor, but family member of Obadiah Holmes, Abraham Lincoln. So just some things to think about, that freedom for any walk of life has always been a trail that this country has worked on blazing, and they haven't always gotten it perfect, whether it be civil rights or whether it be religious freedom and those rights. Y'all have a nice Independence Day and enjoy the freedom that God has given us in worship today.